So I'm happy to be leading this final panel entitled Hype versus Hope. I think the hype part comes into play because of so many of the clinical trials that are coming into the pipeline. There's a lot of excitement, but I think families often have to remind themselves that these are trials and they're not treatments. And it can be tough to reconcile that when right now we don't have approved drugs for Duchenne. But it's certainly an exciting time for our community. So what we want to do, the purpose of this panel to close the conference, is to talk with folks who have gone through the clinical trial decision-making process and perhaps get some insights into what that process was like. It could be a difficult thing to make a decision, and it's been remarkable to be at this conference and see parents having to really wrestle with options for clinical trials. I've been with PPMD for 13 years, and it's really a different day in Duchenne. But I think we also have to remember that there's still a large swath of the community that do not have any options for clinical trials. And we're going to continue to push companies and regulators to come up with innovative designs to include as many of our population as possible. So with that, I do want to introduce the panel. I'll ask every panel member to just say your name, a little bit about yourself, and your level of experience with clinical trials. And let's start on this end with Dr. James Poisky.
Hello. I have a 13-year-old son with Duchenne, and he's not in a clinical trial, he's in a natural history trial, the MRI study that's going on. However, I also have been an investigator in clinical trials, not related to DMD, but in other conditions, so I kind of have the perspective from a parent as well as from a professional point of view.
Colleen.
Hello, I'm Colleen Labadia. I have a 5-year-old son, Brendan, who has Duchenne. We live here in the Orlando area, about 20 minutes north of where we are. We're very fortunate to have Brendan in a experimental drug trial right now. And previously, when he was first diagnosed, he was in an observatory study.
Hi there, my name is Rosie Haas. I have a son, Holden, who'll be 9 in September. He's now, for the past 6 months, been on a control arm of an experimental drug trial.
So I'm Brian Denter. My son Patrick is 29 days short of turning 22. And he's been in probably about every type of clinical trial, natural history study that is possible. He's done a genotype-phenotype assessment, natural history, off-label use of an existing drug for treatment, and he most recently was involved in a treatment trial for an experimental drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
I'm Ann Lucas. I'm with Duchenne Connect with Phenophagic Muscular Dystrophy, and I've worked in clinical research in the clinic setting, been a genetic counselor in a clinic and worked with researchers there, and then also with Duchenne Connect.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Piascatino. I'm a 23-year-old man with, I will be 23 years old, but I have Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and I'm currently in an ongoing treatment trial, and I have been in a previous natural history data trial with the University of Gainesville, and between, I believe, 2009 to 2010.
Hi, my name is Dylan, and Dylan Michelle Nelson, and I'm 15 years old, and I'm currently in a drug trial.
Excellent. So first and foremost, of course, is how you all learned about the trial and how you got information about it to start with. So if we can start with Colleen, perhaps you can walk us through how you learned about this particular trial.
Sure. Brendan's a neurologist who we have a great relationship with. Can give us the name of a trial that said he had a great one for Brendan. And, we're lucky to have those lines of communication that he knows my son well enough, he knew what would be a good fit. And then we came to conference. And that trusty little book that we all get with all the details of every trial. And, I sat through all of the sessions and I made my little post-it notes. And poor doctor, when I came back with my little book and all my notes and questions, and sure enough, when I opened to the first page, he just smiled and said, I knew you'd find it. So it was really nice not only to have his support, but to have the education that we received here at the conference. my husband and I were able to talk to the CEO of the drug company and ask a lot of questions, but receive a lot of information that maybe we didn't think to ask about. So we felt very informed, very knowledgeable, and having his doctor on board with, the go-ahead was just a cherry on top for us.
Excellent. Rose, how did you learn?
So my son was diagnosed actually by an adult neurologist at an academic research institute. So that doctor told me upon diagnosis about the importance of knowing his mutation, and there might be specific trials tailored for that, knowledge that we're near precision medicine right now. So that was really what was guiding me to trials. I do work in research myself, so I've been familiar in adult trials, cancer, other diseases, so I've had the skills to go and look to clinicaltrials.org or look at academic papers already published. Working in a university, I have access to lots of published things that maybe the public can't readily get access to, but so I've had background to be able to do that. But I also look to fellow parents that have been in trials actively and talk to them as well. PPMD has been an excellent resource, so I'll echo that as well.
Dylan, how about you? How did your parents approach you about the clinical trial? I know that they have a unique background considering their background in science, but how did that process happen?
I think they had they would talk to me about it and make sure like I knew everything about the trial and all that stuff, but I would usually say yes. Usually, even without like talking to my parents, just talking to my doctor.
And was your doctor there as well for the conversation? Was it all of you in that conversation?
Yeah, usually.
And Jonathan?
Well, my mom is on the board of directors for this organization, so oftentimes I ask questions frequently about what's going on, so when I first heard about the drug trial that I'm currently on, it was through her talking about what the latest research was, and then her discussing with my dad, and it was essentially when we found out that they were going to be doing a pilot study that I fit the criteria for. They basically sat me down and said, we have something that we think will be very beneficial. Do you want to jump on board because we can get you in, you fit the criteria, and we can work it out so you can get into the pilot study. So.
So you don't have to be on the board to get information about clinical trials.
Yes, that's beside the point. That's beside the point. It's just I had it's not like she had any secret connections or silver opera or anything like that. It was, you can do it, we can do it.
But she talked with you about it, right? And
she basically sat me down and let me know what's going on.
And at what point, and I'm going to stay on this side of the room, Dylan, at what point do you think parents should talk to their kids about clinical trials and participating in trials?
I think parents should talk to their kids like right when they're diagnosed, because that's when they should be learning about the disability and what their life's going to be like and how clinical trials are going to be a part of it, be a big part of it.
I think that's good advice. And Brian, how about your conversations with Patrick? How did you approach him?
So Patrick has participated in a number of different studies, and each time or at home we had to read the consent or the assent documents, and then would sit him down afterwards and speak with him about what the materials had stated. We talked about benefits, we talked about potential risk, when he was younger, it was more of an assent. I think to probably about age 10, parents certainly do weigh more heavily on influencing a child in a study. As the boys get older, particularly in my family, with Patrick, as he got older, his opinion weighed more strongly as to whether or not he chose to participate. If there were some strong objections, that was always taken into consideration. I think beginning by age 14, that decision should be equally weighed with the parents. Certainly, our parent is motivated to do the best that they can for an individual, but their participation is key. They're the ones who are going through the process, and with travel, with the type of dosing, with all that's happening. It's all experimental. It's a study. So after 14, I think that's the point where you start shifting gears and thinking, all right, these are young men, or they're soon to be young men, and they should be part of that decision-making process in terms of deciding whether they wish to participate. And when you reach a point where things may not be going as well as you anticipated, whether or not you choose to withdraw.
And Anne, could you maybe talk a little bit about the consent process when it comes to minors and how that goes? You have a lot of experience with clinical trials, so.
I think the key word you said was it's a process. It's not a one-time thing. So even though signing that consent form might be a one-time thing, I think every time you go to a visit for your child that you're in, it's a time for you to ask questions of the investigator and of your people who are taking care of you. Ask them what they think. Ask what, ask the child what they are thinking and feeling. It's not just the child, it's also the whole family. Because some of these trials can be, very taxing on the whole family. So you have to weigh and balance all that information. And it is a process. I think it's something that you learn more as you go along. It's not a one-time thing that you need to revisit that as you go through the process.
Mm-hmm. And James, when you were talking to Joel, and this was a natural history study you had mentioned, how did that conversation go, or was it you're going to go to your regular clinic visit?
Well, it's more like, Joel, hey, put down your phone. Put down your phone. Okay, hey, listen real quick, just 1 minute. I mean, it's actually longer than that to get his attention, but this is probably going to sound very cavalier and not very professional and all that sort of thing, but I basically said, hey, if you want to do the study, we need to take a free trip to Portland every year and hang out with our friends and get sit in an MRI machine. And he said, okay. So that's pretty much it. Sorry.
Pretty cut and dry.
I should be much better. Bad parent work.
No, that's okay, and I think a number of panelists have participated in natural history studies, and they are very important for this community and for advancing drug development. Dylan, perhaps you've also participated in a natural history study too. Was that experience a positive one?
Yeah, it's a positive.
Overall, do you think it's important for drug development?
Yeah, overall, I think, because it's observational and nothing's really gonna hurt the kid. It's just to see how Duchenne naturally works without drug usage.
Mm-hmm. And Jonathan, you were younger when you entered into the clinical trial process. Was there a conversation that occurred with your doctor and your mom about the process, about whether there would be placebo? Do you recall that?
I don't recall. I believe when we were first talking about it, there wasn't really anything regarding the placebo effect. It was more along the lines of looking to the benefits, placebo or not. And when we were talking about that, both my parents, my doctor, and even my school physical therapist, and made it clear about whether I was receiving the drug or placebo. But essentially, it was this is what's going to happen. So keep your eyes open, keep your eyes peeled. If you think that it's not working and you just see and it just feels like a placebo effect, write it down, take notes. My dad was very active in taking notes when I was in the original pilot study on it. He wanted to compare whether, basically what he did was he took a baseline at home before we started, and then he did another measurement after I went off to see if there was a placebo effect or not. It's very detail-oriented.
And Rose, if we could stay on the topic of placebo, would a placebo affect or impact your thought process on participating in a clinical trial for your son?
So for me, no, I recognize how the proper clinical design would need to be done. So placebos for an end-stage efficacy trial, that's just going to be necessary. The FDA has, recent cases really pushed drug companies to doing that, and from my personal perspective as well, even with the choices of multiple options like early stage proof of concept or safety or dosing trials where you're guaranteed to get a drug, I kind of lean on the side of wanting to first do no harm. So I'm more inclined to enroll in something that might even be placebo randomized, but knowing that at some stage I might still get a drug that's further along rather than something that's just being tested maybe for the first time in kids entirely, or they don't know the dose yet. So that my personal preference and knowing scientific design is like I'm perfectly comfortable to go into a placebo-controlled trial.
And Colleen, not having the same background, but getting information from the doctor, what's your thought process around that, and would that hinder your decision making?
For this go around, it did not. Ultimately, and to echo what Rose said, we want what's best for him, and down the line, that may become an issue for us, but for right now, we understand the need for a placebo, and we see, and having got through everything in April, and to see how the shakeup of the agency is, we understand that it's going to be needed, but we do look at the risk involved, like anything else, benefit risk, and it is something we absolutely consider, but.
And just going back to the topic of talking to your son about participating in a trial, you have a much younger son.
Yes.
So how did you frame this? Did you talk about that this could be a treatment that could help him? And how did that conversation go?
So Brendan's 5, and he still lives in a very magical little world in his imagination. He's very creative, and we kind of just watered it down and explained it to him as we knew he would understand. And we're very open. We talk about everything in our house, and we include him in this, and on everything. And we just said, Brendan, you have the opportunity to take medicine that are going to help your muscles. And he still can't say his R, so his response was wheelie. We said, yeah, wheelie. And he said, will it make me run fast? And we said, well, we hope so. We have such great hope and promise in this drug, so we hope so. And he said, well, good, if I can be like Superman, I'm in. So we didn't have to twist his arm too much.
Okay. And Brian, with Patrick being older, how did that conversation end around placebo? Did you have to have a conversation around you may get a placebo, or how did that happen?
In all of the studies that Patrick has participated in, there was no placebo arm. And I don't want to downplay the importance of it, but we were fortunate, and actually, that's how I describe it. We were fortunate in not having to agonize over that decision of participation based on placebo. But in every conversation that I had with him, it was a frank discussion of the fact that the potential to help you is really and truly only secondary. Helping the community as a whole is the importance of the study. And that even participation might preclude you from actually being able to have a particular drug, provided there was some approval at the end. Are you still willing to help the community, or are you still willing to participate in the process based on that information? And each time the answer was always yes.
So, Jonathan, I want you to tell me perhaps the best part about participating in a clinical trial and the worst part about participating in a clinical trial. Tough one?
I think the best part of a clinical trial, at least for me, was when we were first starting out or heading to Utah for this drug. And the best part was being able to not only go to another place and do a new experience, but I really liked getting into discussions with the doctors and the nurses and getting into insights regarding the actual medical and the pharmaceutical side of how things work, when it comes to the sort of the medicinal face when it comes to Duchenne's DMD, not just the community face. But really it was just knowing that I was possibly receiving a benefit from it, something the first of its kind, something that's going to bring a greater benefit than just the normal regimen that we constantly advise the families to do, and just upping the ante in terms of treatment and quality of life. But the worst parts were the travel, because we were traveling essentially across country for it, and oftentimes we were taking flights in the middle of the night. We'd get there around 12, we were deadly tired in the morning, we'd have to be up at 7, we'd have to go through a series of tests, be out by 3, do the same thing again, and do another series of airport travels. And then there were a couple times with actually taking the medication, I couldn't keep it down, so I ended up vomiting almost every 3 hours. I couldn't keep any food down, except for maybe, a bowl of Cheerios and some water. I lost 15 pounds over a period of a few months, and then we finally figured out what the issue was, and we just kind of muscled through it. There's a lot of frustration going on. We were getting very angry because I couldn't keep it down, so what was the point of being on it if I couldn't keep it down? But in the end, I think it's still a benefit, and now, we've moved locations, so it's a lot easier to do travel, Instead of doing it in 3 days, we're doing it in 1. Still a slog, but we get through it.
Did you rethink participating at any point? And did that come up with your mom and dad?
Yeah, during the phase 2 trial of the drug, it was, we basically sat down and we almost said, I'm about to take you off this because you can't keep it down, and I don't want you to, both my mom and dad said, I don't want you to go through with this because you're in pain, we're frustrated, we're making these flights for no reason, so what's the point? And then we told the doctor this, and they said, well, let's see what happens. Let's take everything off except your steroid, and let's see what happens when we add each pill one by one. As it turns out, I was having a bad reaction with one of my medications. I forget what it was, but we took that off the regimen. It wasn't really needed in the first place, so I got back on track. And then the issue became, well, now that you aren't throwing up, how are you going to get through the taste? It tasted awful.
So Dylan, how about you? The best part and the worst part about participating?
I would say the best part of the clinical trial is that you're able to help other people that are in the same situation as you, like having Duchenne. You're able to help them and help others, give more information, more data about what Duchenne is, and also meeting new people. I really like that, and yeah.
And the worst part?
The worst part? No, for me, it's not really a bad part because, well, I'm fortunate enough to have one of my main trials, my drug trial right next, close to where I live, so I don't really have to travel that far, only like 5 or 10 minutes. I love getting out. Yeah.
So location definitely makes a difference. What about Brian? What about you for Patrick?
So I would say the best part, like most families, I think clinicaltrials.gov is my homepage. So in watching the growth of the availability of new products that potentially can treat Duchenne muscular dystrophy is something that's really encouraged me. The reality of the participation in a study comes crashing down on you, especially when your son gets older. When Patrick first started participating in studies, it was an observation study trying to validate an outcome measure for muscular dystrophy, and Patrick was just on the final stages of walking. He was just over 13, and we traveled every 6 months, and that wasn't too bad. It was an adventure. Most recently, we've been traveling every single week from Maine to Baltimore, Maryland, to participate in a study. And Patrick will travel. We fly every morning. From every Tuesday from home, taking a manual wheelchair out of necessity. We don't want him to destroy his legs because the wheelchair, for all intents and purposes, becomes that. Go to clinic, receive drug, whatever testing, IVs, blood draws, and take transportation to an airport, and then return home sometime in the late afternoon or early evening. And week after week, repeated travel becomes extraordinarily burdensome. And traveling with an adult with muscular dystrophy, Patrick outweighs me by 40 pounds. I can still move him around, I can still lift him as necessary, move him from a manual chair into a cab, onto the airplane seat. And we've had some extraordinarily gratifying experiences, but we've had some rather unpleasant experiences with public and commercial transportation. In my mind, that's probably one of the factors that when people do look at participation in a clinical trial, that you explore quite thoroughly. The impact of travel on the family. Do you have the flexibility in your work schedule to take the time off to travel? What does that look like to a student? High school, college, even in elementary school, you want to participate in band, but you've got to travel to a study. Most of them are Monday through Friday. And it's hard to reconfigure your schedule. The other aspect is probably financial. We are reimbursed for travel, but we carry quite a sum on our credit card in anticipation of a reimbursement, and that really does affect family finances when you're considering the purchase of a new item, and that's that income to debt ratio has been inflated because you're carrying that debt. That those are factors to really think through thoroughly. I think they cloud the enthusiasm that we have for the selection of a clinical trial. And I think that primary to making those choices, looking at how that travel, how that impact on the family as a whole is going to work out, is probably the first decision I would recommend a family would make, because for us, as much as we appreciated contributing to the community, did not realize fully that for the past 28 weeks, traveling from Portland, Maine to clinic and then returning home in the evening with delays and with everything else that happened was very, very challenging.
Colleen, how about you? Has there been impact on the family unit dynamics, siblings overall with participation in the trial?
Sure. I have 3 children total, so it was a lot of strategizing, trying to figure out who was going, who was staying, those left behind. One's a baby, so, he came with me, but it was, what do I do with him once we're out there, and who's going to take care of him while, Brendan's having his test performed. So, it takes a lot of time. It was well worth it. The biggest thing is who's going to pick my daughter up from school, who's going to get her to gymnastics. My husband's working a full-time job. But a lot of work, a lot that goes into it, but at the end of the day, it worked out, and we had a positive experience with it. So, it's good.
Right. And James, you had mentioned that Joel hasn't qualified for a trial. Has that been frustrating? and are you guys checking clinicaltrials.gov weekly, and what's that been like?
Well, not necessarily. I'm going to give you a long answer, and it's going to be a wishy-washy answer.
Okay.
So
I expect nothing less.
That is just kind of the way it is, I guess. So we're in a bit of a different situation. I think we're one of the 10%, roughly 10% of people who we have an in-frame mutation, but we have a Duchenne phenotype. So Joel has been diagnosed with milder Duchenne or severe Becker or somewhere in there, and you quite clearly see all of the same features, but he's still pretty ambulatory at age 13. Certainly we can see loss of strength and going upstairs and those sorts of things. But I think I think that's had an effect on our perspective about clinical trials in the sense that I think it's felt a little bit less urgent for us, maybe, for lack of a better way of describing it. And so I think that's also made us a little bit more risk aversive than we otherwise would be. And so I think, for a long time, just because of his mutation, there really weren't clinical trials that he could be a part of. They just weren't available because they're more focused on exon skipping or the Adler trial. As things are evolving now, there are more clinical trials available, and so I think, I don't know if we have a solid formula that we would use when looking at a trial, say, yes, let's do this one, let's not do that one. I think it's still going to kind of boil down from case to case as far as like, we have a good feeling about this one, what are our friends saying, what are people that we know saying, how much potential risk can there be, and also just what's kind of the level of inconvenience, for lack of a better word. And I don't mean that in a very simplistic way, but just from a quality of life and a family stress level perspective, we can't ignore that, So I go through phases where sometimes I'll go on clinicaltrial.gov and kind of see what's out there, and then sometimes I don't want to deal with it, and I'll come back. And so it kind of waxes and wanes, I think. And it's one of those things where when you see kind of the indicators of change, or gosh, I didn't remember him having this much difficulty going up the stairs, or man, it feels like he's been getting more tired lately, that's when it kind of pops back up. Yeah, so that being said, I think given my background, my training, and what I've done professionally, and then I think Rich has the same view. I mean, at the same time, we do really strongly believe in the importance of clinical trials. And so you get kind of caught between this position where you have kind of like this idealized view of it from one perspective, but then at the same time, when it translates into your own personal experience, it's harder, you don't sort of view it the same way.
Sure. Rose, has there been a specific impact on your family, positive or negative, when it comes to the clinical trial process?
Not at this point, there hasn't been. We've been not involved to the point of weekly visits or anything. It's just been a 6-month, every monthly visits, and then every 12-week types of visits. So there hasn't been any impact. We really took the step to enroll to help get some drugs over the final finish line. I think that's important. We also did it to kind of get our feet wet a little bit and let them get comfortable with going into the clinic for this type of procedure, getting more contact with the clinical sites that might in the future be doing more trials, so really connecting with some of the personal benefit I think we even got on being in a control arm. And my son, he goes with the flow, and we were able to schedule visits, looked at the calendar to try to get him to hit on Christmas break, spring breaks, minimize the amount of time he missed out of school, and it's worked out fine so far.
Great. Okay, we're going to switch to incentives for clinical trials, and we have a number of companies in the room. So let's talk about incentives around participation. And perhaps Brian can speak to, what is helpful for families and what makes you think, well, this will be more doable because of this, whether that's travel stipends or, loss of wages stipends. So could you speak to those things and what you've experienced?
So I think that taking into consideration people's ability to travel and some flexibility in study sites is important. I don't want to dissuade people from participation in a clinical trial based on my statements, but I think that people do need to go into this eyes wide open. It's almost like those little plastic picture puzzles where you're trying to assemble it in such a way that the picture comes out well. Sometimes it doesn't. And I think that one of the things I would urge study sponsors and clinics to do is to take a look at scheduling and maybe make some arrangements so people can travel on weekends or travel late on a Friday and go to clinic on a Saturday and and mom and dad might not miss work, or a student who's really interested in graduating on time and is concerned about grades has the opportunity to fully participate in school and not miss work. In terms of incentive, I guess I'll defer to my son Patrick, who tends to be quite altruistic. He wants to participate because he's very science-minded, he's quite pragmatic, and I think that his thought is that the benefit to the community as a whole is enough incentive for him. But I think in terms of improving the clinical trials process, looking at reimbursement, timely reimbursement for families for travel, and I guess that would also depend on the time factor in travel. We were traveling weekly. Not all clinical trials are going to have that requirement, but if families are traveling, whether it's 2 hours down the road by car or to an airport more frequently, looking at arranging clinic times so that it's more conducive to a work schedule and a student schedule is what I would certainly suggest.
Dylan, how about incentives around trials? I mean, what would you say companies can do to make the trial experience a more positive one for you or your parents, particularly for you?
Well, mine's kind of funny. I couldn't really think of anything else. It was kind of like, I wish they had better snacks. And I wish for like sleep studies and stuff like that, that the beds would be nicer.
How about you, Jonathan?
Well, considering how far we had to travel and what we needed to do every day when we were out there for the drug, especially in the first few months of phase 2, we were out there for at least 3 days, just definitely, when you're traveling for a long period of time, definitely try to alleviate financial costs, because especially since my dad was the one taking me out, so he was always trying to save money, especially with, lodging, either renting a van if we were to stay out there, or getting cab service, or staying in the hospital. I think when a company considers a drug trial, I think they need to look at costs for how much the family is going to be able to pay, and as well as how far they're willing to actually travel for the drug. In our case, it was Utah was the only place we could do it, and knowing how the pilot study went, it basically was, okay, it's in Utah, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it over a long period of time, over a long period of the week, and it's going to eat up like class time. So that was something that we had to consider, because I was also in high school at the time as well. But really, that was the only thing that we worried about was finances and travel. Other than that, it was make do with what you had. My dad and I were very pragmatic when it came to that.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How did you handle the high school? Like, how did you make that up?
Okay, yeah, it was in my sophomore year. I remember I wanted to do it. I remember I was auditing a class. I also remember I was taking geometry and as well as social studies, and grades were a big issue because I racked up like at least 2 weeks worth of homework for geometry, and especially taking the drug in the afternoon, I was missing at least 10 minutes of that class. So when we were telling this to the people down in Utah, like, this is what's happening, I don't want to fail, they basically said, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. You're going to have to get up at around 6 in the morning to take your drug, and take your second dose earlier rather than what you were taking it at now. And as it turns out, after I managed to sort myself out, I ended up dropping the art class I was auditing and redoing my whole dosing regimen. I noticed that there was an increase in my grades overall versus the first 3 months where it was literally eating away at class time. I was gone for 4 days at a time, and I was telling my teachers, I'm going to be gone for this time, and then they dropped at least 4 days worth of homework that I wouldn't be able to get done in 4 days because of the fact that we were in Utah and on plane flights and having muscular dystrophy. You can't always load up with textbooks and papers. And, that's also a big issue too, because I couldn't really find a workspace to actually do anything.
Dylan, did the trial, has it conflicted with school at all?
It's been hard at school because most of this year when I was on the trial, I was kind of worried about my grades because I wasn't doing as good as I wanted to do. So that's kind of what worried me about it, but I ended up doing fine. I was just oversaturated because I couldn't get most of my homework done during that time, and I had to leave early.
Were the teachers understanding?
Some were, some weren't.
And Anne, you speak with parents all the time about clinical trial decision making. Based on those conversations, what do you see as things that companies can do to make that process better or less burdensome?
I think that everybody's commented a lot. The travel is the big thing. Depending on where you are, the institution can be really good at handling that, or it can be complicated. So it's something to ask up front. And hopefully companies and the institutions that are running the clinical trials can think about that process and make it smoother for the families. And really try to figure out, like everyone was saying, that it's not just the travel to and from, it's the work loss. It's all of those other things that are happening. Trying to get trials closer, more evenly distributed and easier for people, places easier for people to get to. Only having 1 or 2 sites is difficult, but of course, this is a rare disease, so that's the hard part. And so there's always going to be that tug and pull of how are we going to manage that.
Colleen, how about you? Advice for companies on making the trial process less burdensome?
We've had a really positive experience with that, and going back to the assistance part, we've been very blessed with the help that we've received.
And what about it has been so positive?
The travel back and forth. We receive financial assistance with our travel, with our lodging, with food, and taking a family of 5 from Orlando across the country is no cheap flight. So we were greatly appreciative for that. It's one less major burden that you have to worry about when you have all these other issues wrapped up in making a decision on a drug trial, and that was an added bonus for us. It was something that we really didn't have to worry about and could focus on our son and the purpose of our trial and making the absolute best out of it. So it was, I'm obviously hearing up here, and that's not always the case, but that would be, in an ideal world, that would be wonderful if every trial could be like that.
Mm-hmm. James, considering your background, I wanted to talk about the emotional and stressful impacts of clinical trials and what your overall thoughts. Is there a role for companies and patient organizations to support families through that process, and perhaps have any ideas around that?
Maybe. I can't say that, I haven't been involved in clinical trials in Duchenne, so it may be, I don't have the fullest picture in that regard, but both Rachel and I interact with a number of families, and we see to varying degrees where it can be very stressful for families, and I think also inadvertently there can be a lot of pressure put on the child or the primary patient in the clinical trial, as far as everybody's expecting these outcomes, and there can be a lot of pressure on the kid to perform. I tend to get the most interaction with people when maybe one of the people in the clinical trial is actually maybe a kid who's got some emotional or behavioral problems to begin with. And I see a whole range of response in those kids. I do see sometimes where things get worse because I think I haven't gotten the impression it's the drug, but it's the stress and the disruption in routine that's associated with clinical trial, as well as I think kids are always kind of barometers for parental stress, and they just kind of soak it up like a sponge. And so I've seen that as well. I've seen where there have been some families who really, to a large extent, really put life on hold in order to be able to qualify for clinical trial or to be able to continue for clinical trial. So like pulling kids out of school. And I don't say that in a way where I'm passing judgment. I mean, that's not what I'm saying at all. But I think just that there's an added emotional burden that goes along with decisions like that, to do that sort of thing. And I think, I don't know, I mean, I think the people here have mentioned some really important things as far as like trying to make it as least disruptive as possible, giving people as much information up front as possible. And, I think that my hope would be that as drugs are approved and are approaching the market, that maybe there would be less pressure for people participating. Just the more broad it is, the more people that are involved, there's a kind of less spotlight sort of thing put on each person who's currently enrolled or potentially would be. So that's my hope. I don't know if I have anything, any secret formula, as far as making a smooth transition. I just don't know exactly what the people here have already mentioned.
Sure. And Brian, during the process, thinking about the emotional and psychological side, are you or your wife worrying about potential adverse events and negative results of the trial, anything along those lines, and how do you handle that if that's the case?
So in the treatment that Patrick has been taking, there has been some serious adverse events. And when Patrick enrolled in the study, we made him fully aware of this. Explained to him that the likelihood that they were going to affect him was probably equal to anybody else in the trial, but did he still wish to participate in? I think in his mind, the science trumped, and he was willing to take that risk. That was part of our concern. The other part is, and I think about this with traveling with an adult with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and that burden, and I worried extensively whether or not fatigue would mask any potential treatment benefit that was being realized. And we are participating in this study so that the sponsor can learn whether or not something works. And if it's being offset by some impact from the travel, I found that extraordinarily worrisome. In fact, Patrick did experience some adverse side effects in this study, and we reported them to the investigator, and that just fed more into my concern. And I do realize that this is experimental treatment, and that as a parent, I had to continually reevaluate that equation. What is our tolerance for risk, and for what perceived benefit? And I don't sleep well at night. My brain is always working, and this just exacerbated that challenge with me. But I realize as a parent that I'm the roadie. As long as Patrick, who is an adult, says to me, I'm going to participate, that's my job to take him back and forth, and I take that all seriously. So as a parent, I also try to shield him from my concerns, and if something were to be exceptional, we would discuss it. But ultimately, that decision to continue participating short of something being extraordinarily serious that was going to be harmful to him, that was his choice. And despite my worry and despite my concerns and reevaluations, I fully believe that my role as dad was to do what was right for my son, and what was right for him was to allow him that opportunity to do something where he thought he was making an impact within science. But I still worry about it.
Thank you. Dylan, have you had any worries related to the trials, and if so, have you expressed those with your parents?
Yeah, I've expressed them with my parents before, but I haven't really had that many emotions about the trial, but recently I've been having emotions about the trial that I'm on now. The drug trial, I would say, is the most recent one because, I don't know, it's just hard to know if it'll work or if it won't work. Yeah.
And if at any point you had concerns and wanted to stop participating in the trial, would you feel comfortable enough to talk to your parents about it and your doctor? Would you have concerns about having that conversation? You know, it's a hard question.
I would say, well, I never needed to so far, so it's kind of hard, but I would say, I would say if I had a worry, maybe, but I'm not really sure because it's never happened.
Take it a day at a time, right?
Yeah.
And Jonathan, same question.
Well, again, going back to the adverse effect issue with the whole vomiting situation, when we weren't sure what was the cause, we didn't think it was the medication. We thought it was what I was eating. We thought it was had something to do with developing sort of a lactose intolerance, because whenever I had anything with milk or cheese or anything like that, it would instantly come back up. But I was getting, in the moment where both my parents and I were at our near breaking point, I still wanted to be on this drug. So when we told our investigator this, she basically said, well, let's wipe everything from your diet and from your pill regimen. We'll take you off everything except the most essential, which was the steroid and the heart medication I was taking, and we monitored what was going on for the time duration from that last visit to the next. I felt like crap. I was instead of drinking the supplement that I was supposed to be drinking, I was doing Gatorade. I started slowing down. I was getting a little fatigued. Everything was it was downward spiral, and then we decided to talk to our endocrinologist, and he said, well, one of the medications you're taking also has some GI effects. That might be your issue. So we went on a lower dose of that, and everything turned out to be all right. And then we told our investigator that, and she's like, cool. You can drink milk now and eat your salsa and destroy your stomach with that instead. But we managed to solve that issue, so it was smooth sailing after that.
That's great. Rose, if your son was telling you he no longer wants to do these visits, he doesn't want to be participating, how would you handle that?
That's a tough one. He hasn't complained in the protocols we're doing at this point because it's very easy. It's like a PT visit.
Sure.
He's getting a toy afterwards. He kind of thinks it's fun. We're traveling to a
Bribery's
state.
good.
Yeah, toys are good. Good toys. Traveling to a state where we have family, so it's kind of organized as a fun visit all the way around. If he's actually receiving drug or going through a protocol that might be more intensive, I don't know at this point how we would handle that. I think it would depend on what's been the duration of that. Certainly after he complains after 2 or 3 weeks, is okay, let's get a little more used to this, how's this going? But if it's simply not working out after 12 weeks, 20 weeks or something, and if we're not seeing any effects, and there's adverse events or anything, you would seriously have to consider maybe this isn't right for him, maybe he does need to come off. Again, as I mentioned before, first do no harm, and this is something I want to adhere to. So we would kind of navigate it with those principles, I think.
Sure. And Colleen, same question, you're the little guy, so how do you, if he came up to you and said, I don't want to do this anymore, Mommy, what do you?
Well, he's 5. I don't know if I would get that reaction from him. He's very laid back, very passive. But his health and well-being are my absolute, obviously, like all parents, that's our absolute main focus. And if I saw that something was, his health was being compromised in any way, I would absolutely address it and move forward with the right decision for him. And I think I say that too because he is very passive about everything. Just telling somebody a funny story, we were at Disney a couple weeks ago and he was made up like Jack Sparrow, but somewhere along the way he banged his shin and he had a gash in his shin and he was bleeding. And a mom stopped me and said, oh wow, is that new? Is that part of the makeup? And I was like, no! But he didn't say boo, he didn't complain about it, he just strolled along with his gash in his leg, and that's Brendan. So I take that to heart, knowing that if he came to me and said he was having the same issue over and over, I would absolutely address it.
Sure, and you had mentioned to me that the trial was an oral medication. Does the delivery of the drug matter in your decision making? Does that factor into the decision making for clinical trials as opposed to a weekly IV or injection? How does that factor?
For us, it would make a difference. Again, he's such a laid-back little boy. Even when he had to have his blood drawn on the days we were in the hospital all day, he just sat there and put his arm down and said, do you want the numbing cream? He said, no, thank you. I mean, he's a tough little guy. And so for us, I'm very fortunate that we could go either way. The nurses, when he did his swallow test, they presented the little tray, and to their benefit, they explained to him that it was a sugar pill, and that's all he heard. Even though they were pretty decent size, he just said, sugar? Like candy? My mom doesn't let me have candy, so down the hatch they went, and he did awesome. So.
And James, do you think delivery of the drug would factor in, and how would that play into decision making?
Yeah, I think it would. I think mostly in terms of convenience, honestly, to tell you the truth. And obviously it would depend on the kid. Joel, he's probably the same way. I mean, he doesn't blink his eye when they draw blood. He'll be like, I need to use the butterfly needle, not the, so he'll tell him what's up. So he doesn't have a problem with that. For our daughter, they would call the police because of the screaming that was coming from her. So, I definitely think so. And that's just one of the additional things that you consider when you're thinking about benefit and drawbacks. In general, the more easy you can make things, the more that you can make them routinized. Like same exact thing, same people you talk to every time. Things like that help.
They really do.
They make it more appealing. So.
And what about with Patrick? Did the delivery of the drug make a difference in the decision making?
No. In hindsight, looking at the time an infusion would take would weigh on me as a parent. But I don't think that IV versus subcutaneous versus oral medication would weigh as heavily on our family. I have a daughter who has type 1 diabetes. Patrick had a need for injections for another aspect of his condition early on. So it's been a part of our life. So I don't think so.
And Dylan? Does the delivery method, doing an infusion versus an oral medication, would that matter to you, or does that matter in clinical trials?
Well, it depends how long it's for. Like if the placebo effect is for most of the trial, that has a factor. But if it's for less, that has a factor also. And I think that would depend on the person and their family.
It's a good answer. Jonathan?
Want the whole story, the abridged version?
How about the whole story? Go ahead. We have time, I checked the
Okay,
watch.
so this could be a little retrospective. I was in the phase 2, and the phase, I'm just gonna call it pilot physics, I don't know what phase it was. In the original study that I was in, they said it was oral, and it was the same dose regimen, and they said, I asked them, well, how does it taste? Can I have a taste? And they said, imagine bitter vanilla. I'm like, so, okay. And in that situation, it was just mix it in water and down it. And then in the phase 2 trial, they said, oh, you might have a better chance of mixing it with milk. And that's where the whole lactose thing started, because we thought it was all the dairy that was causing me to have stomach issues versus the pill. And once we got over that, it was a matter of how are we going to get it in, because it still tasted like bitter vanilla. We went through, oh God, what did we go through? Chocolate milk mix, hot chocolate mix, and marshmallows. I tried eating it at one point, mixing it with fruit.
Try everything.
Banana flavored extract, and then we found hazelnut creamer. And I got so tired of the hazelnut creamer, I'm like, screw it, I'll just mix it in water, and I downed it. And then a year ago, 2 years ago, I don't remember what it was, oh, by the way, you can just mix it in applesauce. Why? Like, how long was that known for? So we decided to do that because during a situation at camp where we could not heat any water up, I told my dad about it. He just went out and bought an 18-pack of applesauce. So that became a new norm, and doing that for 9 months, and it's been a lot easier to handle stomach-wise.
Sure. So I want to give you all a chance to ask questions. So I invite you to come to the mic and ask the panel a question if you have one.
I think everybody's fried.
Is everyone pretty fried? Your companies, this is a free focus group for you, so. Sure. Come to the mic.
Question for people who are participating in therapeutic trials or even the natural history ones is, how important or is it an issue that your clinical team sees all of the data that comes from that to make your life easier? So if you're getting echoes done within the study or PFTs, they're done in a clinical way, they're real clinical tests. Would your lives be easier? Would it be worthwhile? Does it happen that it can be used by your clinical team? And is that important to you?
James?
I think that's a really good question. That actually was important to us, Stan, and it actually, because we're in the natural history study, and so we had all of the kind of the typical milestone measurements that are used, sent to our clinical team at Cincinnati, and actually that information has been taken into account, and I think has had an impact on some clinical decisions that we've made. So I don't think we realized how important it would turn out to be, but it actually has, it has been a major benefit. So.
Anyone else?
I like data, so getting that information, it helps me to make more informed decisions as a parent in my son's care. So absolutely, any additional information that they're giving us about cardiac or pulmonary function, and anything like that along the ways, if that's provided, I'm going to scoop it up.
Would you just make a comment in the company, would you say it says that they have to release that to primary physicians?
I would.
Yes, and I think there's more utility to this than just satisfying my curiosity. I think the more data points that are collected in a clinical trial, the more robust information we have about individuals who are participating, which is only going to help the community as a whole long term.
And especially when you tell all your doctors back home that you're going to be on this new drug, anecdotal data can only go so far. Especially in my experience, it was so we were talking about observations with what was happening during that time. So instead of going for data that was unavailable to us due to the nature of the trial, and this was for the treatment trial, the doctors back home would say, okay, well, let's do a blood test, or let's do a pulmonary test, or let's do an EKG, I forget the name of the technique where they use, test cardiac function. It was the doctors back home that were giving us this data, and then when the data became available to us, as Brian said, parents and I just scooped it right up.
Well, basically what happens, Stan, in that situation, in Jonathan's case, he was having issues, and we were trying to diagnose them. Well, I couldn't get the data out of the clinic. I had to rerun the data and send it back to them. And I was like, well, can't I get the baseline so I can at least show the docs what's going on? And I couldn't do it, so I find that valuable. Especially if you're running into a situation where you need to figure out what's wrong, what's causing it.
I had an inherent renal issue, but it turned out it was nothing. So.
Yeah, I think parents should feel free to ask a number of questions regarding this data and what they can expect, and what they're going to be made available. Go ahead.
So while the trials were being performed, were you allowed to participate in regular physical therapy, other treatment, and then how did that look like with the traveling or other issues with that?
Oh yeah. What happened in that situation was they basically said keep doing what you're doing, and we told our we don't really have a clinical team, so oftentimes we go to the cardiologist, we go to the pulmonologist, and we go to the endocrinologist and these individual doctors, and then we kind of coordinate with the information that we're getting from each of them with each other. And then, especially during since this is ongoing, we are allowed to continue the treatments that we are doing. I think the protocol in that situation is you're not allowed to do 2 experimental treatment trials at the same time. And really, when it comes to a clinical trial, what you're doing beforehand is your baseline, and then you can still do it while you're on the drug, and if you notice improvement in any of those categories, then make the observation and tell it to your investigator. When it comes to traveling, if you get fatigued from traveling, that was also an issue because a few times when they were doing testing, I said I was really fatigued because we were tired, and I ended up sleeping on the couch one night, and I woke up with I felt like gelatin because I was crouched for 6 hours, and I could not do any of the tests because I kept tripping over myself. But basically, it's keep doing what you're doing. If they're doing a certain trial where they ask, you can't do this, then that factors in. But right now, most trials are basically, you're going to be on this drug. What happens. If you notice any improvement, decline, anything, let your doctors know and let us know, and we'll mark it down if your doctors can figure out a way to take care of it, and let them take care of it.
For me, I agree with Jonathan, and the part where I agree with him for most of it, but the travel part hasn't really happened for me. But yeah, they pretty much say just keep doing what you're doing. They don't really try to intercept with what you're doing in general, because yeah.
So I want to thank the panel, because I think you are sacrificing a tremendous amount of time and effort. So I want to thank the parents, but also thank John and Dylan for sharing this and for being part of the study. So I think it's really important. So thank you. The question I have is surrounding a little bit about social media and also being paired up with other parents or being able to talk to other participants. So maybe I'll pick on Dylan and John. Would you like, when you're in a trial, to be paired up with other kids to be able to talk to them and share your experience?
Yeah, I would like to be teamed up with other kids and being able to talk to them about their own experience, because you kind of get to see like where they're at with it and where you are, if they kind of share an interest in a way. And yeah, so it's kind of cool to interact with somebody that has something like you.
I agree with Dylan, but I'm going to take a little cynical road right now. I like to keep to myself. So being on a social network is, I find, very uncomfortable unless all we're discussing is what's going on with the clinical trial. I don't like putting myself out there all that much unless someone initiates a conversation with me. So, that's just my opinion. That's just social preference. But again, if you can connect with other people within the same study and discuss the experiences in that study, whether you have negative side effects, whether you're enjoying yourself traveling, whether you enjoy the experience with the investigators, and I think that's great. It allows you to feel like you're not the only one doing it, and you're not alone in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So before your question, what role should social media play when it comes to clinical trials? I know it's been really good for general awareness, but is there any concerns with social media in terms of clinical trial participation? Brian, maybe you can comment on that.
So I think there's a challenge with sharing of data, primarily with studies where there are placebo arms. And I think it's human nature to try to tease out participation results and to determine whether or not who is receiving, or an individual in the family is receiving drug or not. And I think that there are situations, and I would urge the primary investigators as well as the sponsors to emphasize when and when not to participate if there's going to be any negative reflection on the validity of a study. Because ultimately, the route to the quickest passage is what we are all seeking, and if participation in social media is an interruption, I think that is extraordinarily problematic. But at the same time, when you look at these forums, they have been exceptionally valuable to families in terms of support. It's really a really difficult question.
Mm-hmm. Rose, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that. I guess the social media can be somewhat a blessing but a curse as well. I found it valuable to hear about the process of getting into the trials, just how things have ran, but the balancing then the reports of what some patients are saying they're seeing after 8 weeks or whatever, just keeping a realistic expectation about the truth and the anecdotal evidence, and then you have to just filter out what might be more biased like that. And I know this is an issue, again, working in the healthcare field and working on NIH-funded research myself. This is something that even NIH has acknowledged as an issue. I happened to connect from work probably a year or so ago where they host yearly the NIH Digital Summit, and there was a whole panel exclusively on that, and drug companies and researchers doing, oh, we've got a big problem here. What do we do now that we have all these patients groups and trial participants on Twitter and Facebook? Yeah, it's a real big problem for the trials, but how we solve it, gag orders, I don't know.
This is kind of a question for Brian and Ann, but I also appreciate the thoughts of the rest of the panel. I am wondering if there are, or if you know people or resources that could help parents talk out, like my son's 53 and looking at a 2-year placebo, but I sit and listen to all the things that are coming down the pipeline. And I am trying to figure out how to make a good decision that I can live with myself later. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, on the one hand, I want to do what's good for the community, but on the other hand, he's 9, going on 10. So.
Yeah, no, I think, and if you can comment on that, I know Pat speaks to the if-then scenarios all the time, playing those over in your head, so.
And one thing that we're doing with Duchenne Connecting, the Coordinate Project, is trying to make a clinical trial decision aid tool that would actually help you go through that process. First, from a, do I even want to be in the trial, and don't even think about any particular trial, but do you just want to even consider it, and go kind of over the pros and cons of that. So we've got some of that in place. We don't have the tool developed yet, but hopefully in the next couple of months we'll have it. The other thing that we want to do is to be able to let our registry serve as a vehicle for you to see what trials are actually you could possibly do. What would you qualify for? We can go ahead and do that in Duchenne Connect right now. If you come to me, I can tell you based on what we know. But I would like to have a digital tool there sitting on the site to let you know automatically. We have our FAQs on the website, so the things that are in your program booklet, those are also on our website. You can always contact Ryan, me, the other Ann, any of the other staff are happy to walk through that process with you to kind of think about that, because I think you need to talk to several people. It's not just that PI of that study, it's not just your clinical team. Talk to lots of people, talk to other families as well, and kind of get their views on what has it been like for them, and what do they think about it.
It's a lot of information gathering and talking to your doctor. I've had several parents come up to me and ask, what would you do? And it's a really tough question, and I'm not qualified to answer that. But I do think that you need to be aware that there is clinician bias as well. And if you can seek out additional opinions like at conference, I suggest doing it. Does anyone else have comments?
So I'd like to add a couple of thoughts. And first of all, I think that two things. First of all, I think this is an extraordinarily interesting opportunity for us as a community to consider. But at the same time, it's exceptionally frustrating. When you consider a child who is 9 or 10 and considering participation in a 2-year study that might be placebo-controlled, and what does that look like on your ambulatory status, my heart goes out to you. I truly understand. And what are the options? And what does the data suggest that could potentially do? And is that buying you the time? You're playing chess all the time. I echo what Ann and Ryan said. I think it's a conversation with multiple people. And ultimately, it winds up being a decision within your brain about what is your risk tolerance. And risk is not only just side effect in clinical trial. It's, am I willing to accept participating, having my son participating in a trial that could potentially be placebo-controlled? So I won't want to influence anybody, but I do understand the nature of the question, and my heart goes out to you.
Ian, final question. Make it good.
Yeah. No pressure. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Well, what I want to know is, I think the theme out of the conference for the entire time was kind of limitations of clinical endpoints as they currently exist, and making a real effort to expand it to the younger patient population and the older patient population. And I think feedback that we're getting from the panel is that obviously clinical trials can be extremely burdensome. There's a big time component to that. And so I'm wondering the openness of people on the panel to spend more time in attempts to validating other clinical endpoints that can bring the field forward, understanding that you have to balance it with the life that you're dealing with in terms of school and work and all the other factors that play in.
Gentlemen, do you want to start with any thoughts?
Well, there was, when it comes to making a decision like that, knowing all the additional factors that you have to look at with how much time is going to take out of your work week, whether you're in school or you have a job, what's travel going to be like? How are you going to be able to transport yourself if you are wheelchair bound? How is it going to be that you get from the airport to where you need to go quickly and efficiently and make up your time frame, as well as how testing is going to work, how the drug is going to be administered, all those factors. In my experience, I'm the type of person that says, make do with what you have. And by make do, I don't mean like settle if it's if you're in a shitty situation, pardon my French. And it turns out that it's not very good. I remember at one point, aside from doing the trips out to Utah during high school, I was also in a natural history study, doing frequent trips out to Florida, and there came a month where I was in school. I went out to Utah, came back for a week and a half, and then I had to go all the way out to Florida. And when I say make do with what you have, it's try to keep going forward with the clinical trial, no matter what the endpoint is. If you truly want to gain benefit from it, as well as help out the community. If you're in a situation where it's difficult, then see what you can do. I know for me, when my dad lost function in his back and hip, he developed extreme pain. He could no longer lift me without having essentially what amounts to spikes going through his back. My mom ended up taking up that burden, and when I lost when my ambulatory ability became significantly reduced, we went to, okay, instead of trying to waddle onto the plane, potentially tripping over everything, let's do everything in the wheelchair. And at one point, it was get in the manual, transfer to the car, transfer to the manual, go to the airport, transfer to an aisle chair, transfer back to the manual. And then when we got the van, it became even easier, where it was get into the power chair, transfer to the manual at the airport, and then do that entire process again. In that way, it became easier. But if you are in between a rock and a hard place, and you cannot do that, then you need to weigh in, is the benefit of this drug equal to the all the additional factors that add to that burden of getting that drug? It's like, do I have to, am I swimming through a river filled with crocodiles, lions, tigers, and bears, and every single predator on the planet to eat an apple, or am I walking along the road that's guarded by a fence, and is an easier path and not wasting energy to get to a tree filled with every fruit you could possibly think of? I haven't had Patrick's experience where he's on multiple clinical trials. I've only been on one, and it's ongoing. And in each situation that arises, if we can find a way to make it easier on ourselves, we will, no matter what the clinical endpoints are. Again, we make do with what we have.
Brian, final thoughts? So quickly, I think that's an important question. I think every data point that you collect is helpful. Ultimately, the reason for treatment is for improvement of quality of life. And if participation in the trial is negative to that, then I think the reevaluation should be made about whether or not participation is actually beneficial to everyone. So I think that over time, the collection of data about a family's experience and individual's experience traveling to a trial can help to influence and inform the decision making, the study design. So I think that is useful to collect. So thank you for asking.
How about a hand for our panel?